Now we can have breaking news.
No, yeah.
Because it looks more official, like
yeah. See, I just have that breaking news from Kermit the Frog in my head now. That do 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 do. Do you remember that when he used to do news alerts? No, okay, you can cut that.
Do you
out.
want to sing it this time?
No, I want you to sing it.
I don't know. Mine doesn't really have any type of tune to it, but it's. We now interrupt your regularly scheduled program to bring you breaking news.
Yes,
Siri, what did you want to share?
Welcome to Generally Speaking about crime.
Oh yes, that too.
Yes, so we're going to generally speak about the Unabomber. For
a short time.
For a short time, yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about him and memories that we have of him, because I feel like if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, like, the Unabomber was sort of like, he'd pop up every once in a while, like there'd be a bombing somewhere.
Yeah.
Or somebody would open a package and it would explode and it was tied back to the Unabomber. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about him, maybe how he got to becoming the Unabomber, and then what happened to him.
You're going to educate me on this.
Yes.
The only thing I really remember is when the police were escorting him out of his cabin in the middle of the woods. So
Yes.
I really didn't believe they had the right person, only because it just felt like one of those crimes that would just never be solved or they'd never track down.
Yeah, and it seemed crazy that this guy who was living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Montana
with little technology or ties to the outside
no electricity,
world.
Right? And he could create these bombs, which were, I mean, he ended up killing 3 people, wounded 23. His bombs were no joke. I mean, he sent them to people for a reason, and he wanted to inflict harm on people. So let's talk a little bit about him. Well, here's a fun fact. Do you know why he's named the Unabomber?
At one point I did.
Okay.
That point is gone.
That point is gone. Okay. So the first 3 bombings that they tied to this person before they actually knew who it was. The first 2 were at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. And the 3rd one was aboard an American Airlines jet.
Oh.
So they took UN for university and airline for A for airline and B for Unabomber.
Then I don't think I ever knew that.
Okay. So that's how he got the name. And he mailed and left bombs at targets across the country that he felt were contributing to the destruction of the environment and advancing technology in a negative way.
Okay.
So this is actually a map. They were offering a $1 million reward, the FBI was, any information on the person who was leaving bombs really from coast to coast. And it wasn't like he was picking a specific, target. It was like airlines or universities or lobbyists or computer repair shops, he just had this almost like a revenge kind of thing, I think, and just was really unhappy with technology in general, and took his anger out on those targets, which made sense to him. Right.
Yeah. Did he ever say what he had against Northwestern University?
I don't remember ever. Yeah. No, I don't remember.
And why American Airlines and not another airline?
Right. Exactly. Why not like Northwest or
Okay.
I mean, I think to him these targets probably made a lot of sense, but like to the FBI it was like, okay, we cannot figure out what is this person actually doing, right? So his targets included airlines, universities, including Berkeley, Northwestern, Utah, Vanderbilt, Yale, and Utah. Computer stores and repair shops, advertising executives, lobbyists, and scientists. He murdered 3 people and wounded 23. Many of them were seriously wounded.
Yeah.
Some people lost limbs, they lost their eyesight. These bombs were no joke. Actually, the last 2 bombs that I don't know if he mailed them or got them, how he got them to the targets, but his last 2 bombings were fatalities. And the last person that he killed, his body was so badly mutilated by the bomb, his family was only able to view him from the knees down, which is just, that's just outrageous, yeah. So Ted Kaczynski was born in a Chicago suburb in May 1942. He was a genius. He was a child who was like well ahead of his peers academically. He skipped 2 grades and graduated from high school at 16. He was admitted to Harvard and graduated with a BA in mathematics. So think about how smart you have to be to graduate from Harvard with a BA in mathematics. He received his master's and his PhD from the University of Michigan. It was not his first choice, and he has very unpleasant memories of his time there. That was what I read. He did not like Michigan. So eventually he ended up at Berkeley, and he was like the youngest person ever hired at Berkeley to be a professor. He was this will maybe not be a surprise, not well liked by the students and had no close friends in the math department.
Okay.
I mean, he was
So he's a math professor?
Yeah, he's a math professor, he's a loner, he doesn't get along well with the faculty or the staff. The money that he saved from his time teaching and bought land in Montana near where he has a younger brother.
Okay.
And his younger brother was working in Montana, and the two worked together to build a cabin in the remote wilderness of western Montana. So that's the cabin that you would have seen on the news when he was arrested. So the bombings began in Evanston, Illinois in May 1978 and commenced in Sacramento, California on April 24th, 1995 with the killing of Gilbert Murray, a timber lobbyist. So in 1995, he had reached out to, I don't know if it was the newspapers directly, but the New York Times and the Washington Post were involved in a conversation with like the FBI and the Attorney General at the time about he wanted to have his manifesto published.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And sort of in return for publishing this manifesto that he would not target individuals anymore. He would only target like buildings or
okay.
So there was a lot of discussion like, should we publish this? Should we not publish this? Like, are we giving into terrorism by publishing this, right?
Yeah.
So the New York Times and the Washington Post jointly funded the publication of quote unquote industrial society and its future, and that was his manifesto. And the head of the FBI at the time, Louis Freeh, and the Attorney General Janet Reno both supported publishing the manifesto in hopes that it would be read by someone who recognized the writing, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember that because I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time and subscribed to the Washington Post. And I remember getting that and reading it, and it was like this 8-page, like, I don't know, it was just his ramblings, but it was his writings, and what I remember about that is just all the discussion around actually publishing it. But it turned out to be a good move because shortly after it was published, a woman named Linda Patrick encouraged her husband, David, to read it. And he recognized some of the terminology used as being the same or very similar to things said by his older brother, Ted.
Yeah, I remember that too. It was a family member who
It was his younger brother, yeah. So Ted and his younger brother had like a complicated relationship, like they got along for a while. When his brother decided to get married, that kind of ended the relationship between the brothers. And but his brother had saved writings that Ted had sent to him, and he recognized a couple of phrases that were in the manifesto that were also in the things that Ted had written to him, and that was what tipped him off that this was probably his brother. So he and his wife hired, I think they hired somebody to look into this, like a private investigator, and then ended up hiring an attorney, and then they worked with the FBI, and the FBI then looked at all the evidence and sort of kind of zeroed in on Ted Kaczynski as, you know, maybe a probable or likely suspect in the bombings. So, as you said, you remember this, he was arrested in his Montana cabin on April 3rd, 1996.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of the end for the Unabomber because he was captured. David Kaczynski received the $1 million.
I was wondering that.
Yep. So he received the reward for the capture of his brother, and he ended up donating most of the money to the families of the victims.
Yeah,
of his brother's nationwide bombing campaign.
Yeah, so we deal with it.
Yeah.
So it just feels. He did the right thing, obviously, but like you just don't want to also be benefiting from turning your own family in.
Yeah, I mean, what it sounds like is his brother was really conflicted about. And I think he had some stipulations, like he had to promise that the FBI or the government would not pursue the death penalty in his brother's case. Long story short, Ted Kaczynski goes on trial. He refused to go along with his attorney's advice to plead insanity. He was found guilty and sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences to be served at a supermax prison in Colorado. Okay. And his fellow inmates included people like Eric Robert Rudolph. He was bombing like abortion clinics, and then went on the run for a while. Was hiding like in the woods of North Carolina. Ramzi Youssef, who was one of the original. He was involved in the original bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, and then Timothy McVeigh.
Wow, he's with all the bombers.
I know, this is where they kept them. Yeah, so
retired bombers.
I mean, it's a supermax prison. It's where the sort of the worst of the worst go. So.
I know, it's just weird that they all have that common.
Yeah, and I actually think he and Timothy McVeigh were friends. Like they were.
Yeah, I remember when that happened.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that was terrible. In 2021, Ted was transferred to the Federal Medical Center. I think it's Butner in North Carolina. And that's a hospital where, it's a federal prison hospital where male prisoners with medical issues go to get medical treatment. And he was there probably, I want to say like 18 months maybe, because it sounded like he went there at the end of 2021 or at some point. And if you believe, like I read a lot of the stories on the New York Times, I think they really covered this pretty well, and it said there were 3 sources that indicated that he committed suicide while he was there. So,
so was it like an infirmary?
I'm guessing, yeah. I mean, I'm guessing because he had cancer, so he,
all right.
it's actually where Bernie Madoff died as well. He was in that because Bernie Madoff went to jail and then he developed kidney issues, and then he ended up at that facility as well. So.
Okay.
So, I mean, I just think, when I think about the Unabomber, I'm like, I remember hearing about, every once in a while, hearing about these bombings on the news and seeing the wanted poster, right? Like that, I think if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, like that's pretty memorable.
So
Yeah.
Standard.
Yeah, I mean, you would have seen that like in the post office, or it was on TV, it was probably on America's Most Wanted.
Did he ever really look like that?
I don't know.
Like
I mean, it's hard to say.
Young
So,
years?
yeah, so this would have been, I believe this is from the bombing that, I believe it was in Salt Lake City. No, it wasn't that one, I think it was at this, maybe it was Sacramento.
That someone spotted him?
Yeah, so he was leaving a bomb like in a parking lot of a computer repair shop or computer place.
Yeah.
And this guy who, I think he either owned a company or he was like the CEO or something, was just going out for lunch, and there was a box in the parking lot, and he picked it up, and it just he was kind of standing over it, and it just blew him up. So, and somebody had seen him, this person, leaving the box there, because I kind of opened the window, and he was like, he put the box down and then got up and then walked away.
Wow.
So yeah, so I mean.
What would Ted Kaczynski think about where we are in this day and age with
Well,
all the technology we have in just the palm of our hand?
It's crazy. Actually, so there are people who look back at his manifesto, which is available online, you can read it, and think he did have some pretty,
good points.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that other people say that. Because, I look at Ted Kaczynski and I think whatever, good ideas or philosophical ideas he may have had about technology and the environment, he was a murderer. He killed people. So
he could have done something else to make his viewpoints understood or accepted.
Yes.
Not force people and kill people along the way.
Yeah, I just disagree with like political violence to advance your means. So but there are people who are like, they really think that he was ahead of his time. He had some really good ideas. Yeah, I don't know.
All right.
I didn't shed a tear over his passing, but I think it was, it was definitely newsworthy, and it was a crime that, basically took place from 1978 to 1995. So that's a long time of
long stretch.
Yeah, long stretch. So yeah,
okay.
That's it for the Unabomber.
Well, thanks for that tip. All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.